Welcome to the Sales Compensation Show, where we share the latest sales performance insights through in-depth discussion with experts. Season 3 of our show is your backstage pass to discovering how today's most successful sales and revenue ops teams support go-to-market strategy and improve sales performance. Plus, we'll explore what we can learn about incentives from different industries more broadly. Subscribe to hear how leaders are unlocking new growth, implementing the latest compensation trends, and their priorities for improving go-to-market performance. I'm your host, CEO of Form AI, Nabeil Alazzam. Ali, welcome to the show. It's so great to have you on.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited. I love doing podcasts.
Yeah, I feel like there's no better way to just nerd out on RevOps. So before we dive in, I always ask this question because at the end of the day, none of us woke up when we were 5 thinking we were going to be here today, and would love to hear your story, how you got into the world of RevOps.
Yeah, I went to college for radio, TV, film. So yeah, how I got here, I don't know.
RevOps, yes.
I can tell you that I started my career in sales, in TV sales, actually. So I was doing more advertising and like traditional media. And then I discovered the internet, very early adopter of the internet and thinking it was like the greatest thing since sliced bread, and was kind of really into BB boards and like communities back then when people didn't even, like people didn't put their own photos on the internet back then. So I was just really into it, and I really found that, the world was transitioning to this digital marketing thing that was brand new. And I made a transition in around 2007 to go into digital marketing at a tech company in Houston. And it was like, fell into it, like literally just fell into this job. Like the VP was like asking me how I could organize this staff and how I could be an advocate for these older gentlemen that were running the company to all these young babies that were working in like as the tech people. They were like, we don't know how to talk to our staff. And I was like, I got that for you, no problem. And they were like, what interesting websites do you visit? And I was like, all of them? I don't know. I was like, that's a weird question. And they were like, what about like that Icon has a cheeseburger site? And I was like, the LOL cats? And they're like, yeah. I was like, oh yeah, I totally know what that is. And I, read it every day. And they were just like, oh, she's the one. I didn't know anything about marketing or digital advertising at the time. I just showed up and like rolled my sleeves up. And it was like the greatest place for me to understand that like I got the tech behind it really well. Like
Yeah.
I easily picked it up, could be more creative than I was in like a sales job and media buying job for traditional media. And so I just ended up working there and then going to a competitor at Rackspace. And then Rackspace really solidified, like, you're an ops person. You've done demand gen for a long time, but you now understand deeply, like, how important ops is for that role to be successful. And that just kind of started me on that ops journey. I was like, yeah, I gravitate to these systems. I was like a early adopter of Marketo. I think I was one of their first 500 customers. So like all of those things on those early years of like, how do we execute B2B marketing in a tech world and on the internet and all of this stuff really just scratched my itch and ended up being here, like building an ops team and ops resume.
It's amazing, like the digitization of sales
Uh-huh.
obviously created the RevOps function that it is today, right? I mean, you think about when I first started my consulting career and my career in the space, it was like sales ops and RevOps were, kind of truly just starting to get their foothold as a solid division within a business and kind of a necessity. And I think that, you know, there's always that right time, right place to kind of like get acquainted and get, brought into the space. But yeah, it truly is very rewarding. I've always found it rewarding because you touch a lot of different parts of the business, you see it, and then you have to machinize this. But if you step back and you think about kind of your background, all the different roles that you've had, I think like, how are you now applying that experience and ultimately the learnings and lessons into your role at Health Catalyst today?
Yeah. So I think, starting in the Wayback Machine when I did sales, that gives me a little bit of an insight as to like what sellers need, what their challenges are, and what would help them on a daily basis to do their jobs better. And like if I had this when I was selling, wow, that would have been amazing. So I have that piece too. And then most of my background is truly marketing ops. and understanding and working in GTM teams and demand teams that relied heavily and like fed sales, right? So we were always that front end setting up all of the data and the things, the lead handoff and deeply understanding what the whole revenue life cycle looked like because we had to start at the beginning and set up all of the things that would that would make sure that all of the downstream processes were working correctly. And so, from my perspective, when we think about RevOps, it's number one, it is the entire life cycle. It is not just marketing ops or just sales ops or just sales ops, like a lot of teams consider RevOps to mean. And two, marketing ops people have so much of a different, a broader lens than just like maybe a sales leader does. It's a really good transition for us to like, if we want to go broader into the whole GTM spectrum of operations because we do have to understand the systems that maybe the sales team exclusively runs because we have to do so much in the front end to make sure that those systems can fire off the way they need to. So for me, I love the whole idea of architecting the entire journey and making sure that the customer is always being serviced appropriately at every stage and that all of the teams are set up for success in order to do that process or that servicing of the customer.
Yeah, I think that mindset of how do you create the best customer experience will always result in the right outcome. It's kind of like the incentive alignment is very strong there if you do it right. How has that shifted from your prior experiences outside of healthcare to now being in the world of healthcare?
So outside of healthcare, like I think the biggest differences for me was that I had to wrap my head around the fact that we had a limited TAM in every sense of the word. I came from global companies, larger companies than Health Catalyst, number one, a couple of really big ones. And even one that was about the same size as Health Catalyst is now, maybe a little smaller. But they were all had a global imprint or they were high volume. They were very different in terms of like we're dealing with volumes of data and volumes of sales that Health Catalyst will never see. And that changes the game. Part of what really intrigued me about the role was that the systems are gonna be much easier to maintain because they're small. You've got a smaller TAM. You just have smaller sets of accounts and people, your contacts and your leads and all of these things. The data sets are just smaller. So keeping that clean and structured is much easier than when you're like, "Hey, I can sell to any business in the world. Let's go figure this out. This account structure and how EMEA is gonna do it differently than how APAC's gonna do it, then LATAM. That's a huge difference, and it makes I don't know, it doesn't make it more challenging. I think it makes it a little bit simpler, but it introduces lots of other challenges within that realm. Like, now we have to be much more intentional about everything that we send out from a marketing perspective, from a sales perspective, because you've got this tiny amount of people that are just circulating all the same companies. So if you disservice one, whether they were a client or not, or somehow you turn them off to even thinking about Health Catalyst. I mean, that's a big chunk of your potential revenue and especially if that person then goes to another healthcare system because that happens constantly. Most of these folks don't like go be the CFO of a healthcare system and then the CFO of a tech company or the CFO of a, I don't know, brand of shoes. They typically stay in the space. So that relationship that we're building is really important and making sure that our systems support that and our processes support that is really paramount to our success.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, yeah, you typically say do you have a data breadth or data depth problem? And I think, like when you're going after a TAM where you have the number of accounts is not really changing. Like how many new hospitals are being built, on the regular within a city or whatever. And you think about that depth and that quality. I mean, you probably are now, you have to think about data quality at the individual level within those accounts and the intentionality for sure. I mean, you have to,
Today. Yeah.
yeah.
I was just going to say one thing that does really help us. There's a company called Definitive Healthcare that provides account structuring and insights into anything healthcare, right?
Yeah.
So they already have the healthcare like infrastructure because it's, you usually have a hospital system that's maybe like grandparent deep. Like you have the grandparent hospital system, and then you've got the parent hospital, and then you got all the subsequent children that like line up to one of the parents, because there's probably multiple parents under the grandparent. So they provide that structure for us so we don't have to worry about keeping our account structure clean to have a direct integration with them, and their hierarchies come into ours. We deviate a little bit and we have some workflows that keep that clean just from like who is the buying entity perspective. But to me, that is like the biggest gift for us because you cannot do that in a company that is got any business you can sell to. It is very hard to understand the account structure when you have a bazillion entities of Coca-Cola all across the country and you're trying to like structure an account and know who can sell to who and where and at what level can they buy whatever you're offering. So to me, that was like, ooh, this is perfect. This is amazing. This is such a great way for me to be able to keep this clean.
Yeah, I feel like if you can find those organizations that have like that data pool or the data sets that are relative to your industry. I mean, this is again in healthcare, there's numerous of these organizations, but even outside, whether it's education or anywhere where there's a deep niche and that account like limit exists, I think you tend to see there's a lot of investment made in kind of building up these strong data sets, and it's almost always worth from what I've seen, or the ROI of
Yeah.
that investment, if the data is used properly, can lead to wonders from the RevOps perspective.
Exactly. It just makes there's certain things that it makes so easy for us that we don't even have to think about that piece because there's way far other complexities that we have to worry about that just makes it a little bit easier.
Yeah, 100%. So, I mean, I know that you're a champion of data quality. We've had this discussion and kind of that element of it being such a massive lever for the go-to-market. Do you mind unpacking what that means and from your perspective and how you know, bring that into your day-to-day and as a RevOps leader?
I mean, there's so many ways to unpack that, right? Like to be more efficient, you have to be able to run automation. If you can't run automation in your systems because you've got either gaps in your data or just dirty data, right? Things are not normalized. Things are duplicated. Like if you have duplicate records of accounts or people within those accounts, it makes that so much harder to really get that holistic view of the customer, of the account itself, even if they're not your client. Like, how do you get to the white space in that account if you don't even know, like, who the players are and how they line up as far as your buyer committee goes and their org structure. So, like, all of those things play into how we can be more efficient with our time and with our systems. And I am a huge proponent of automating what I can so that the sales team can be as efficient as possible when they're looking within their territories and trying to either prospect or even push a deal through. I want them to not think about the administrative BS that goes behind that. I want them to go close business. I want the BDR teams, if we don't really have BDRs right now, but in other, organizations, I want those BDR teams to make prospecting is super easy. Getting their cadences out the door is super easy. Getting that meeting booked is super easy. I want to remove all of that friction. And so in order to do that, to make sure that that customer is still getting service perfectly, that means that data has to be as pristine as possible so that they're talking to them about the right things, so that they are reaching them with the right messages at the right time. Without that infrastructure, it's so hard to do that. And so to me, that data layer, that infrastructure and that architecture of all the systems is so important in how they connect to each other and how they talk to each other and what they're pushing through. I liken it to trying to ride a roller coaster and all of a sudden you've got missing track. And what does that do to you? Like, how dangerous is that? You're gonna be coming down a hill and all of a sudden you just like veer off because you hit this whole section with no track on it, right? That's how it affects automation in that way because you can't really automate and trust that the automation are working if your data infrastructure doesn't have any holes in it. So to me, that's just like tantamount to like where we even start.
Yeah. No, I really like that. I mean, the more your data is accurate at a very granular level, the more refined and tailored the automation can be. And so you have this like balancing act of how tailored and dynamic, and as a result, higher ROI can I get my automations? And that same level of investment to reap that reward has to be done on the data side. So, yeah, I really like that correlation. It kind of brings it to life. So you put that investment in, and I mean, I've seen organizations do this, spend a ton of money, they buy the data, they do these cleanups, and then 6 months later, the inaccuracies, the data issues start to creep up because it can't just be a one-off activity, right? So it's like, how do you think about building a scalable process for data maintenance and management?
Invest in data orchestration tools. So things that will automate the cleaning for me, automate the organizing for me on the front end. They're always looking. So, like, for example, if we have a new record come in, form fill from marketing, list upload from an event, salesperson goes and adds a contact, doesn't matter where it falls in the spectrum, it goes through a washing machine cycle to make sure that that data is normalized and camel cased the right way, that certain segmentations are happening, that we can drop someone into, we can identify their job function and job role and their job seniority so that we understand, like, are they a decision maker? Are they an influencer? Are they, you know, a true part of the buying committee, or are they somebody that's going to support that buying committee? It goes through this whole function within the first 10 minutes that we drop in the record. So that just sets the stage right there for keeping all of our records normalized and clean and deduped. So that number one, to me, that's the first thing that I do when I go into an organization. If they don't have this, I've bought the same tool 3 times. Not gonna lie, it's called Open Price. But I bought it 3 times because to me that is a secret weapon in keeping everything automated and clean in the very beginning. And then from there, the one thing that I will say we struggle with is our contact management, because there was a time when we did have a BDR team and they were super excited and they were just putting every contact in there and not necessarily giving them a contact role. And the existing contact roles didn't really fit the way the business had moved into. So we've been doing some work on updating those contact roles and slowly having our teams go in and update contacts, but in mass, like giving them a spreadsheet versus trying to get them to go into Salesforce and do it. Here's a spreadsheet. Tell us who we should reject. Cool. Now we have all your rejected stuff. We've gone and done uploaded that in mass. Now tell me what roles they belong in based on our new roles. So we're working through that with that team to really clean that up and try to make that an easier process, because the biggest complaint we were seeing was like, why are there 400 contacts on my one hospital system? They don't know who to talk to, and we don't know who to market to.
Yeah. I mean, you got to build the machine itself to
Yep.
maintain it. And I think it's the right way to think about it, is like in these pillars of like, because contact data and managing that and the workloads associated with that are very different than account attribute data and
Yeah.
where you get that information, how you oversee it. So maybe about kind of maybe a broader question on data, which is like the RevOps function, or really kind of using data to support the customer experience and the selling motion, is one piece. But there's so much more to that, right? In terms of like you're also supporting the analytics and dashboarding for the executive part, the leadership, for customer service, for product feedback and sharing with the organization, all the way to something like a comp plan, right? And the measures that you incentivize on. And so how do you think about all the different stakeholders of the data when you're building out and executing on the structure for managing data?
I mean, I think about one, I talk to everyone. Like, the first thing we do, and when we're thinking about we're gonna make a change to either comp plans or things that we are presenting, or like when I got here, we didn't have CPQ. We didn't have any sort of real quoting tool because the original Health Catalyst data infrastructure or data analytics platform was very bespoke. And so every deal was very high touch, very unique. And so they didn't really think that, a tool like a CPQ would be beneficial to them. As they started acquiring companies, we found that like, well, a lot of these are much more, they're point solutions. They're much faster process. There's not a lot of customizations that go into this. So now we have to think about all of these aspects and bring this in. So like really understanding what the problems were and what everybody needed to get out of it and what it was going to solve for. And then going sell that to the executive team that was like, we don't need this. And I'm like, that you do. You really, really do, and let me explain to you why, and so, like, I had to make I did, like, here's our current state, this is what our new state will look like and what you can get out of it, and the first big aha moment was that they could easily understand the breadth of opportunity we had in renewals. Like, how much in dollars is on the table every year in renewals. Before, it was a guesstimate or, just really hard to track because you didn't have that whole, like, life cycle of a quote and a contract in your system. So when that aha moment came, like, we spent a year and a half putting this in and a lot of money. Here's your output. Now you know you have X amount of millions of dollars on the table every year in renewals and why you need to focus these teams on making sure those renewals happen and we can cross-sell, upsell them. So like it's to me, it's more about where is the business and the maturity, and then how do you go sell what you need across those teams and be able to show the benefit and the ROI to it.
Yeah. Yeah, you can almost break up the investment by problem set that you're solving and kind of get buy-in
Like,
across.
how much does it benefit you or think that you reduce costs and time and effort and frustration if you actually know how much money you have to go renew this year
Yeah.
versus, kind of playing it by ear or doing the like finger in the air thing.
Yeah. 100%. I mean, it's so relevant to like comp plan design because it's
Yeah.
in I think for me, what we typically see, a lot of times you'll hear, "Oh, the comp plan's not working. The comp plan's not working." But 80% of a comp plan or whatever significant portion of the success of a comp plan is tied to, are you setting the right targets and do you actually know what good performance is? This goes
Exactly.
back to kind of like if you're not fully aware of the renewal number and then now all of a sudden a rep has a certain target and then they either significantly or exceed or they underperform, not because they underperformed, but just because there's no world where they had enough renewal business in that territory to kind of make up the number.
Exactly.
And so, like, setting that right quota, setting the bar of what good performance looks like is driven off of that data quality.
Exactly. Or even like for us, one of the complexities in our territory design is you have some of the parent hospitals that are, say, in the East Coast, but they have hospitals across the country. And so, how do you think about who owns the relationship and can they sell all the way down to every hospital in the chain, even though their territory might be Northeast, but there's hospitals in California? Do they get that revenue and how does that count? And then when we had regional leaders, they were like, but that's my region. I want to say that even if this person in this other region sold to it because it's part of their hierarchy, I want credit for that sell in my region. So we had to like, you know, take a look at, did the regional quota make sense versus the individual rep quota? And how do we tie all of that together in a visual, which makes it very hard because you're looking at two different cuts of the data and you don't really have tools that just do that. And if we were not worrying about a different regional quota than like the sales team quota, it would make it super easy to just use like native Salesforce tools to do those things. But we had to do a lot of customization in dashboards in order to get those views that everybody wanted, to understand that. And then also to know, does this make sense? Is this even achievable? And then we ended up changing up the model the next year because it was too hard to manage and really decided on one new business sales team, an expansion sales team, and then having more regionalized account management teams instead,
Yeah.
which made
Yeah, the
the
closer
sales
to the actual
process much
accounts.
easier. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so we could only see like, well, all the new sales and all expansion is going to come through this one sales leader. So now we can just say your team's quota goes all up to your quota and we can see that, much easier in the systems.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that makes sense. And so, on that note, more broadly, how do you think about, because this is a common issue, right? How do you think about balancing the complexity of a plan or incentive structure with the operational feasibility of executing and the consistency? And
I mean, the way I think about it personally is I try to keep the plan as simple as possible. If we can convince the leaders to make things as simple as possible, even though we know we have these complexities across teams and the various, we have enterprise sellers that are selling multi-million dollar deals, and then we have more point solutions that are much smaller deals and move faster. How do we build something that fits everybody's needs, but is still some relatively easy to execute? And some of that is just, here's table stakes of what we're going to have no matter what across the way. And then there's like these outliers that we weave into it. And so that's sort of the approach that we take when it comes to that. I wouldn't say it's easy, but I think keeping it as simple as possible and saying, like, this is table stake standards. Let's start here. And then we can move on to like the anomalies or the things that make it harder. And then isolating those things. And then how do we solve for both in the systems and in like everyday, managing of like, is someone hitting their target? And what does that mean from a compensation standpoint? It's still, for us, there's still a lot of manual work behind the scenes because we do have these bespoke contracts in the enterprise space. So there's still a lot of manual work that we do each month to reconcile, but we have gotten it to a much better place and much more consistency behind it.
yeah, I mean, it's always, yeah, it is a balance. Simple is better when it comes to incentives, because at the end of the day,
Yeah.
if they're not understood, you have a much bigger problem, right? Of
Yeah.
kind of rudderless sales.
When you have a 26-page document that describes your comp plans, sometimes I'm like, I start reading it and I'm like, my eyes are crossing with all the legalese that have to go into it.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I'm like, talk to me like I'm dumb. What does this even mean? And like, how do I think about it in terms of operationalizing this for the teams?
Yeah. Well, because I mean, yeah, I've said this many times, and I think you want your sellers to look at their plan and and game their, and game is a very aggressive word here, but effectively it's optimize their account plan and their business plan for the year based off of the territory and the incentives that you put in front of them. And the more complex you make the incentives, the harder it is for someone to naturally optimize. When you have many, many variables to optimize on, it becomes a mathematical problem and not a, gut, or kind of like a problem that someone's not gonna have to pull up and build their own kind of really complex spreadsheet to do. And so you do wanna keep it simple. There are elements that make it complex, but I find that, we typically see people overweight, problems that aren't incentive problems with incentives. So if, maybe it's you don't have the right role definitions. I mean, you're explaining your example, right? And I think it's a very perfect, like, hey, maybe we're making this complex because we're not structuring the right roles and overlay concepts. And you're better off fixing that structure. So I really love the example that you gave, because in a lot of cases, most organizations just end up staying with the status quo of making the plan overly complex.
Oh no, I raised a lot of loud voices about it.
Yeah,
I made a lot of noise about it because I was like, I hear you, I know what you're asking for, but the systems don't do this. And we don't have enough people and resources to babysit this the way that it would take to do this. So let's just do it this way instead. And finally, we got some buy-in across the teams for it. But it was
or make the investments in the systems because we think that there's a good return. But that's a very, yes, if you have to do it in a way where you can execute, for sure. So speaking of systems, I think RevOps, tech stack, I mean, like, they go hand in hand. And you think about the amount of tooling and the bloat that's happened in the tech stack and RevOps. Love to hear your perspective on how you evaluate your tech stack and how you're not overcomplicating process.
the big thing for me is that there's just some non-negotiable table stakes that you need. And if you have those right tools, if you have the right CRM, the right marketing automation platform for the stage you're in, you have a good way to keep the data between the two clean, whether that's an orchestration tool or rules. In a much smaller company, you can probably get away with like rules between the systems. But if you have those three things and you've got good ways to track your deals, like your contracts signing, your quotes, those kinds of things, and you have your other in the marketing world, the ways the channels need to perform. Like, do you have a good webinar platform? Do you have good ad platform? Do you have good ways to understand intent signals? Like, to me, that's your table stakes right there. And then you've got nice to haves that you can add on and layer on as the company matures. I think there's a lot of times that people try to solve problems with tools that are way too advanced for where the company is.
Yeah.
And I mean, even I fall into that, right? Part of my balance that I struggle with is I want to advance the teams and I want to advance our capabilities in being a more modern platform. This is not just for Health Catalyst. This is like the journey of my career, right? I'm looking 10 steps ahead about like what should we add next, and then I have to figure out what's the right time for that, and how do I bring everybody along on that journey? Because it is hard to get people to change their mindset or think about doing something differently than they had been doing it. And like one example, we brought in 6 Sense for both sales and marketing to really help us with our relationship management between all of these, hospitals and still in the C levels in these roles, and really understanding when they're showing intent to need our product or to need to change something, or maybe they're gonna churn. Like, it was such a blind spot for us, and I was like, we can bring in an intent tool that's gonna help us with this. And really getting everybody to buy into that was hard for the beginning part, and then now that we have it, getting people to adopt and use it the way that it should be used has been a challenge for us. We're working through it, and so, like, I do feel there's this balance of, like, are we ready yet? And maybe we're not quite ready yet, but we've gotta push this organization to change their thinking and do it through this tool. I don't really have the right answer. It's more of, like, an instinct feeling of, like, we're at a pivot point. We either do this now or we don't do this, and we can't do it for another year or whatever it is.
I mean, yeah, I think like you touched on a few really good points. It's like the tooling itself, there's an investment cost
Yep,
and there's an ROI that's an output. I always find like the balancing of like where you are in the maturity of the company and the size for every tool, there's almost a relatively fixed investment cost. So some tools that are meant for more mature organizations, doesn't matter how small or big the company is, there's at
mhm,
least a minimum threshold of investment that's required to implement. And so you just have to gauge the ROI accordingly when you're doing so. But I think the other side of it, what you're talking about, kind of the change management, it's so true. It's not just implementing the tool. You have to think about the process to maintain, use it to reap the rewards. And I think that that part is where you have this kind of this negative stigma around tool bloat. I mean, in theory, you can have a lot of tools if they're all well organized and structured together and they're being used.
yep.
You could actually reap the reward and see an ROI. Whereas you can have half the tech stack, if a bunch of them are not being fully utilized, you're actually less effective. So it's
Totally, totally. And it's funny because, again, this company that I work for, there's a lot of folks that have been here a long time and they don't have the breadth of experience of like working in different companies. I worked in 5 different tech companies, plus, early years of being in sales and whatnot and TV. And it's just, I have a different, I have a bigger like worldview on tools and things. And so when they're like, we have so many tools, and I'm like, "But do we? We really don't. Our tech stack is real light. It's real lean." And so when they're like pearl clutching at like what the cost of the tools are, like how many we have, and I'm like, "You don't have any idea what like, these big organizations that are global, what they spend on their tools and how many they have, or even just what the licensing cost is, because you've got to have 600 licenses for one sales team versus 50 for ours. So it's, bringing some folks into reality about that is part of the change management process.
yeah, absolutely. So just to shift gears here a little bit, into a segment, which is a quick fire segment that'll tee up on what we call the RevOps Mythbusters. We're dispelling, common myths with your point of view, or maybe even tell, maybe there's some truth to it, and would love to get your perspective. So, I mean, if you're cool, we can jump right in.
Go
Okay.
do it.
So very relevant to what we were just talking about. More tooling in RevOps means more efficiency.
God, no, not at all. More tooling could mean more efficiency depending on the maturity level of the company. The reality is, more tools doesn't mean anything. It's about the maturity level of your company and also just the needs of your organization in general. Like, we are not a transactional company. We will never probably have a product that you could just come and either buy on the website or buy within a 30-day sales cycle. So we would never buy a tool that would facilitate something like that. And so, there's a lot of tools that are meant for, a more transactional thing. And sometimes they get people excited and they're like, we should do this. And I'm like, there's no chance that we can do this because it doesn't support our sales cycle. So, the new shiny tool is a big deal, but it's not about the number of tools. It's about like meeting your business needs.
Yeah, 100%. No, I agree. And meet your business needs today and in tomorrow as the business
Yes.
changes. Yeah. Okay, shifting gears. Here's another myth, potentially myth for you. Sales comp plans should be the same across all regions, all sales teams for simplicity.
Absolutely not. Especially if you're global. Like, you can't have a comp plan that services EMEA that's the same as servicing the US or North America or LATAM or anything.
Yeah.
They have different thresholds of what is tolerated in a business. They have different governing rules around business compensation. So there's a lot of different things that go into that. But even if you're just talking like US or you're just talking business segments, sometimes you've got a more transactional sell that has less complication in it. So that means that you don't necessarily need to incentivize it the right way as you would, an enterprise deal that has a lot of complexity and you're having to maybe travel a lot and show a lot of demonstrations and do a lot of diagramming and whatever it takes to make that sale, right? That compensation is going to be higher. Your base salary is likely higher. You have less deals. You may be able to make a lot more money. But the way that the complexities that go into selling that takes a lot more maturity and sales poise to do that, even.
Yeah.
So it doesn't make any sense to have like minded across everything.
Yeah, for sure. And I couldn't agree more. In fact, I think we're going to see more and more individualized as the hurdle rate for individualization becomes lower, right? And then this goes back to kind of like the more fidelity you have and accuracy at the data, the more refined you can be with your automation, the more you can be, and with your automation, the more you can tailor incentives or structures or dashboarding to the individual. This is a little bit of a curveball here, but I think it's relevant. The role of the BDR is dead and AI can take over.
I just had this conversation Saturday night at my girlfriend's house, who's a CMO. We I don't think that's ever gonna be real. I think there's a lot that you can do to automate the functions that they do, but that doesn't take away from that personalized touch. We are not in a place anywhere near in a place that I think you can automate the messages without a human being looking at those messages and being like, "This sounds like I wrote it," versus, "This sounds like a robot wrote it." I don't think that that'll ever be a thing. I think there's always gonna be, especially in enterprise plays, like a qualifying team that's setting up and teeing up meetings for an enterprise seller, and that enterprise seller is gonna be focused on closing deals while that BDR team is gonna be sourcing them. That's just I don't see that changing anytime soon, especially with how much more complex deals and sales and business is getting. I just always think there's gonna be a human touch there, and I can't wrap my head around AI doing it all.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I mean, I think if you look at the value of time is almost directly correlated to how much you can accomplish with said time, right? So it's like if you go back 30 years, someone was willing to, fly to a customer and spend, or vice versa, have a vendor come in, and that could have taken a whole, you know,
But
day. And that was the workday. now, I think because of the efficiency that we have to operate and all the tooling and the virtual world that we're on this Zoom, this Zoom call right now. And I think because of all these things, the hurdle rate for your use of time now increases significantly. And so the value of human time becomes
Yep.
higher because you can accomplish more in said hour than you could 30 years ago, which means that, to me, it's kind of, counterintuitive to assume that, okay, now we're going to devalue the customer's time by throwing AI. You could see a world where you can have an AI SDR that's interacting with an AI email handler in the vendor side, on the prospect side, that is then doing their back and forth kind of initial setup, but that
Yeah.
human time almost becomes more valuable. And so to me, it's almost the exact opposite. Like, you need to throw even better resources at that first touch and that human experience, not less, but using the tooling. And this kind of, what we talked about earlier, to automate more, to enable your sales team to
Optimize.
do what they do best, which is, building that customer experience.
But you need the brain. That was what we kept saying Saturday. We were like, but you need the brain. The human brain has got to work and make sure that, you know, uh, the thoughts and the clarity of the human emotional touch is even there.
Yep. 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 We all buy with emotion and justify with logic. And I think,
Say that all the time.
yeah, emotion is much easier with a
Or
human.
illogic, whatever.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Okay. One last one here for you. You can't scale a complex business or complex businesses without customizing absolutely everything.
No, that's not real. If you can convince people to keep it simple and be in the room to as they're talking about adding all this complexity and really challenging them on why and saying, why do you think you need that? What if we just did XYZ to keep it more simple? And then you sit there and you think about it for a second. And if you can have those really good dialogues, there is no reason to customize and personalize every single thing. Otherwise, you lose all of your ability to optimize your time and optimize the systems and work faster in them. And if you use them the way they're intended to be used and you don't have to do all this mental acrobats around how do you manipulate it to get what you want out of it, you can just use it. It's makes everything like your ops teams can be leaner, your time and frustration in trying to get something to work could be more spent on creatively thinking about how do we do business better. There's just so much incentive to keeping it simplified, in my
Yeah.
opinion.
Yeah. 100%. No, I can agree more. I think, yeah, you maintain agility. And a lot of the times, the customized parts is because we made a decision a long time ago and it kind of got lost in translation while we made that shortcut decision at that time. And it's just been the way it's been done. But it's hard to
And
kind of
dates.
unroot those and untie those knots.
That tech debt is like the bane of my soul.
Yeah.
And whenever I go to a convention, I not convention, that's such an old word, but any kind of trade show or any event that I go to and I hear someone talking about the intense customization they're doing, I'm like, oh, that is so much tech debt. And a version of me in 5 years is going to have to go undo whatever you just said.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. 100%. Well, before we wrap up here, I always ask two questions and would love to get your perspective. So he's jumping in here. So in the world of RevOps, who would you most like to take out to lunch and why?
This would be such a nerdy answer, I swear. John Miller, who invented Marketo and Engagio, because A, I'm a marketer, and B, he was so forward thinking in what tying marketing to revenue at such a early age or early time and just forward thinking in so many ways. I know he's got something cooking right now, but I don't know what it is. And I want to go pick his brain about what the future is. And when we're thinking about ABM, what is the next step? I just think, he's gonna if he hears this at all, which I don't know if he would or not, but if he does, he's gonna be like, "Who's that little girl over there just talking about me?" I don't know who she is, but I would take him out to lunch in a heartbeat.
Yeah, 100%. I feel like, yeah, it's what a radical shift marketing went through from the early 2000s to what it is today.
And no, and to be frank, there's still some people that market like it's 1995, and I'm like, "Where have you been?"
Yeah. World has changed. Yeah. 100%. Okay, final question here. What book, podcast, or any resource really that you have found to be tremendous in helping you, be able to lead RevOps today?
I don't think it's a single resource or a podcast or a book even. I think people write books a lot, and I think sometimes they're really relevant and good in the moment. But I think for me, it's that people connection that I keep. I have a huge network of people that I've worked with over the years because I was fortunate enough to work in bigger companies. And so, seeing how we've all grown in our jobs and our lives and careers, and we all see different things at some of these companies we're at. Some of my mentors are now like Forrester analysts and, chief product officers and, you know, really badass like marketing executives and things like that that I just really trust and talk to on a regular basis. Like, what are you seeing? How are you balancing this? Or how are you working through this? To me, that is the bigger teaching moments or aha moments that I have
Yep.
versus, reading a book or listening to a podcast, even though I love podcasts. You will normally hear me listening to ones about chefs and home decor. It's not gonna necessarily be like a RevOps one.
Yeah. No, I love that answer. And especially for those that are early in their career, kind of investing and building that network and the peer group that you can kind of
The
grow
peer
with.
group is
You just
so
kind of, yeah, it's an exponential gain of experience
yeah.
across.
I just went to brunch Saturday with like 5 ladies that I hadn't seen in a while, but we just picked up like we left off, and it'd been years. One of them was one of my old managers, some of them were peers, some of them were people that worked at multiple companies with me, and it was so good to catch up, and we were all like, "It's so good for the soul to realize that, like, we all have the same stupid challenges that are going on every day, and we can, talk about what that is." And then I left and, like, went to my best friend's house, he was a CMO, so, like, it's just so important to me to have those relationships, and all of us at one point, all of those people I talked about worked at one company.
Yeah. Yeah. I have a very good group of friends that all came from the early days of my career. And I feel like, yeah, there's a tremendous amount of value in kind of maintaining
Yeah.
and investing in those relationships. Well, thank you so much for joining. This has been an amazing conversation. I've really enjoyed it. And I think in the spirit of giving back and kind of sharing, hopefully that, there's many nuggets of advice I think people can take, especially those that are kind of scaling their career. But it means a lot to have people, leaders like you come in and share your experience. So thank you.
Anytime. I love talking and sharing my viewpoints and experience.
The Sales Competition Show is brought to you by Forma AI, the sales performance management platform that fully integrates sales planning with rapid, scalable incentive compensation management. Our data platform brings together how you can plan and manage the entire lifecycle of territories, quotas, and incentives. With global customers like Autodesk, Stryker, and Hootsuite, we enable go-to-market teams to plan and deploy even the most complex SPM strategies at speed, taking you from idea to execution instantly. To learn more about Forma AI, visit our website at forma.ai. Hit the subscribe button and find more episodes of the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. Thanks for tuning in.